If you found yourself in a relationship with someone who makes you question your own sanity, someone who leaves you constantly defending yourself, someone who seems to twist every conversation into an attack on your character, then you need to understand something crucial. You're not dealing with someone who plays by the same rules you do. You're dealing with a narcissist, and they have an entirely different game plan. What you're about to learn might challenge everything you've believed about how relationships should work. It might make you uncomfortable, but if you're tired of feeling manipulated, exhausted, and constantly on the defensive, then these insights could be exactly what you need to reclaim your power and your peace of mind. The fundamental difference: they're not playing your game. When you enter into any relationship, whether it's with a spouse, family member, coworker, or friend, you operate under certain basic assumptions. You assume that relationships are built on mutual respect, reciprocity, and shared understanding. That's the framework you bring to every interaction because it's what allows for meaningful human connection. But here's where you make your first critical error. A narcissist doesn't see relationships this way. Their game is entirely different. They're not interested in mutuality. They're interested in power. Every single interaction they have with you serves one primary purpose: to secure control, attention, and validation on their terms. Think about Sarah from Denver, Colorado. She spent 15 years married to Robert, constantly trying to understand why he never seemed to appreciate her efforts. She would cook his favorite meals, remember important dates, and bend over backwards to accommodate his moods. But no matter what she did, it was never enough. Robert would criticize her cooking, forget their anniversary, and then somehow make her feel guilty for being upset about it. Sarah operated under the assumption that if she just showed enough love, patience, and understanding, Robert would eventually reciprocate. But what she didn't realize was that Robert wasn't trying to build a loving relationship. He was trying to maintain dominance. Every time Sarah tried harder, she was actually reinforcing his control over her. This is the fundamental truth you must understand. Narcissists will distort reality without hesitation. They'll gaslight you into questioning your own perceptions. They'll undermine your confidence so that you become more pliable, more easily manipulated, and they won't feel guilty about any of it. That's what makes them dangerous. Why your kindness strategy is failing. Many people make the mistake of thinking that if they just show enough kindness, if they're patient enough, if they explain things clearly enough, the narcissist will eventually come around. This belief is not just wrong, it's actively harmful to your well-being. A narcissist does not learn through reason, discussion, or moral appeals. They learn through consequences. If you refuse to recognize this fundamental truth, you are setting yourself up for endless frustration, self-doubt, and emotional exhaustion. Let me tell you about Margaret from Phoenix, Arizona. She worked for a narcissistic supervisor named David for 7 years. Every time David would take credit for her work or publicly humiliate her in meetings, Margaret would respond with increased dedication. She thought that if she could just prove her value, if she could show him how loyal and hardworking she was, he would start treating her with respect. But Margaret's kindness wasn't changing David's behavior. It was enabling it. Every time she absorbed his abuse without consequence, she was teaching him that he could continue to treat her poorly without any real cost to himself. The harsh reality is this: your willingness to be understanding is often seen by a narcissist not as strength, but as weakness. It's an opportunity. It tells them that they still have control over your mind, your emotions, your actions. Recognizing their psychological tactics. So what does recognizing their tactics actually look like in practice? First, it means paying attention to patterns rather than words. Narcissists are experts at saying exactly what you want to hear. They'll promise change. They'll feign remorse. They'll even play the victim to keep you entangled in their web. But the real question is, what do their actions consistently demonstrate? If there's a pattern of deception, manipulation, or disrespect, then that is the truth of the situation. regardless of what they say. Consider the case of William from Atlanta, Georgia. His adult son Michael would call him whenever he needed money, always with elaborate stories about temporary setbacks or emergency expenses. Michael would promise to pay him back, express gratitude, and talk about how he was finally getting his life together. William, wanting to believe in his son's potential, gave him thousands of dollars over the years. But the pattern told a different story. Michael never paid him back. The emergencies were often fabricated or exaggerated, and the promises of change never materialized. William was responding to his son's words rather than recognizing the clear pattern of behavior. One of the most insidious tactics narcissists use is gaslighting, making you doubt your own reality. They'll deny things they've said, even when you have evidence. They'll rewrite history, subtly shifting the narrative until you find yourself apologizing for something you didn't even do. The more you engage in these arguments, the more control they gain, because the very act of defending yourself places you in a subordinate position. Another common tactic is intermittent reinforcement, alternating between affection and cruelty in unpredictable cycles. This is psychologically powerful because it mirrors the mechanism behind addiction. If someone is consistently cruel, you will eventually detach. But if they occasionally throw in moments of kindness, your mind starts chasing the reward, hoping that if you just do the right thing, you'll get more of the good and less of the bad. Then there's projection. The narcissist will accuse you of the very things they are guilty of. If they're dishonest, they'll call you a liar. If they're emotionally unstable, they'll claim you're the one being irrational. This serves two purposes. It deflects attention away from their own behavior, and it keeps you so busy defending yourself that you don't have time to recognize what's really happening. The most destructive trap: seeking their approval. One of the most self-destructive patterns you can fall into when dealing with a narcissist is seeking their approval. And I don't just mean overtly trying to impress them. I mean the subtle, almost unconscious ways in which you modify your behavior to avoid their criticism, to gain a shred of their acknowledgement, or to finally just once be treated with the respect you deserve. Take Elizabeth from Portland, Oregon. She had been married to Thomas for 23 years, and over time, she had unconsciously shaped herself around his moods and preferences. She stopped expressing opinions that might trigger his anger. She abandoned hobbies he dismissed as frivolous. She even changed her appearance to match his evolving preferences, all in the hope that someday he would appreciate her sacrifices. But that moment never came. Because narcissists don't operate within the framework of reciprocity, they see your efforts not as a reason to respect you, but as confirmation that they control you. Every time you contort yourself to avoid their disapproval, you reinforce their dominance. Every time you wait for their validation, you grant them power over your self-worth. If you think there's some magic combination of words or actions that will make them see you for who you really are, you are wasting your time. For them, the goalposts are always moving. The moment you think you've done enough, they'll find a new standard to hold you to, one they never intend for you to meet. Here's the core realization that can set you free. Their inability to respect you is not a reflection of your worth, but a consequence of their pathology. The narcissist's sense of self is fragile, built on an illusion of superiority that must be constantly upheld. They cannot allow themselves to be wrong, because to do so would shatter that illusion. They cannot allow others to be truly seen or appreciated, because that would mean relinquishing control. The power of emotional detachment. Once you understand this reality, the correct response becomes clear. You must detach emotionally, psychologically, and where possible, physically. And that begins with one critical step. You must stop looking to them for approval in any form. That doesn't mean being rude. It doesn't mean retaliating with cruelty. It simply means removing yourself from the psychological game they are trying to trap you in. Let me share the story of James from Chicago, Illinois. For years, he tried to maintain a relationship with his narcissistic brother Paul, Every family gathering became a minefield where James would carefully monitor his words and actions to avoid setting Paul off. But James finally realized something important. He was giving Paul enormous power over his emotional state by constantly trying to prevent conflict. James decided to try a different approach. He stopped explaining himself to Paul. When Paul tried to bait him into arguments, James would simply say, "I see it differently," and change the subject. When Paul distorted his words, James let him. When Paul misrepresented his intentions, James didn't correct him. At first, Paul escalated his behavior, trying harder to provoke a reaction. But when James consistently refused to engage, something remarkable happened. Paul began to lose interest. The dynamic that had defined their relationship for decades began to shift. Not because Paul changed, but because James stopped playing the game. This is what emotional detachment looks like in practice. It means no longer justifying yourself to them. A narcissist thrives on argument because argument implies that their opinion matters. The moment you start defending yourself, you've already lost, because now the conversation is being framed around their perception of you rather than your own intrinsic reality. It also means letting go of the need for closure. This is one of the hardest lessons to learn. We all want resolution. We all want that final moment where the narcissist acknowledges their wrongdoing, where they apologize, where they finally give us that sense of justice we've been waiting for. But that moment isn't coming, and the more you chase it, the longer you remain ensnared in their web. Setting boundaries that actually work. Here's a hard truth you have to come to terms with when dealing with a narcissist. They will never respect your boundaries unless you enforce them. And enforcement doesn't mean explaining your boundaries over and over, hoping they'll finally understand. It doesn't mean making threats you don't follow through on. It means action. It means consequences. A narcissist doesn't recognize boundaries the way a healthy person does. When you tell a healthy person, "This behavior is unacceptable and I won't tolerate it," they'll at least pause and reflect. They may not always agree, but they'll respect that you have a right to draw the line somewhere. A narcissist, on the other hand, sees your boundaries as a challenge, an obstacle to overcome, a test of how much they can get away with, and they will keep pushing until they find the breaking point. Consider Patricia from Houston, Texas. She had repeatedly told her narcissistic mother, Linda, that she wouldn't tolerate guilt trips and emotional manipulation during their phone calls. But Patricia kept accepting Linda's calls even when Linda immediately launched into manipulative behavior. Linda learned that Patricia's boundary was just words, that if she pushed hard enough, Patricia would cave. Everything changed when Patricia decided to enforce her boundary with action. The next time Linda started her usual guilt trip, Patricia said, "Mom, I told you I won't discuss this. I'm ending the call now." And she hung up. When Linda called back immediately, Patricia didn't answer. She stuck to her boundary for 3 days. Linda was furious, but she also got the message. Patricia's boundaries weren't negotiable anymore. Over time, Linda began to modify her behavior during their calls, not out of respect, but out of self-interest. She realized that crossing Patricia's boundaries meant losing access to her entirely. This is where people struggle, because action is difficult. Setting and enforcing boundaries means accepting that the narcissist will react badly. They will accuse you of being selfish, of being cruel, of being unreasonable. They will play the victim. They will lash out. But you have to be strong enough to tolerate the discomfort of doing what's necessary. Remember, if you like what you're hearing so far, be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel for more insights on dealing with difficult relationships and protecting your emotional well-being. The Gray Rock Method, becoming uninteresting. One of the most effective techniques for dealing with a narcissist is called the Gray Rock Method. This involves making yourself as uninteresting, unemotional, and disengaged as possible when dealing with them. Narcissists thrive on reactions, whether it's anger, frustration, sadness, or even affection, because reactions mean they're still in control. But if you refuse to engage, If you stop giving them the dramatic emotional response they crave, they lose their leverage. They get bored. They move on. Think about how this worked for Dorothy from Miami, Florida. Her ex-husband Charles had been using their shared custody arrangement to continue manipulating and controlling her long after their divorce. Every exchange of their children became an opportunity for Charles to criticize her parenting, her appearance, or her life choices. Dorothy would find herself defending and explaining, getting drawn into arguments that left her emotionally drained. Dorothy decided to try the gray rock approach. When Charles criticized her, she would respond with, "Okay." When he tried to bait her into arguments about their past, she would say, "I need to focus on the children right now." When he made snide comments, she would simply not respond at all. Her responses became so predictably bland that Charles eventually stopped trying to provoke her during exchanges. But let's be clear, this isn't easy. It's not easy to sit in the presence of someone who is deliberately trying to provoke you and refuse to take the bait. It's not easy to hear outrageous accusations and choose not to defend yourself. It's not easy to watch them rewrite history and simply say, if that's what you believe. But it is necessary, because every time you engage, every time you fight back, every time you try to prove yourself to someone who has no interest in truth, you are feeding the very dynamic that is draining you. Why they'll never give you closure. One of the most difficult realizations you'll have when dealing with a narcissist is understanding that they will never give you closure. That apology you're waiting for. That moment where they finally acknowledge the pain they caused you. It's not coming. And the longer you wait for it, the longer you stay trapped in their psychological web. Narcissists don't reflect on their actions the way healthy people do. They don't lie awake at night wrestling with guilt, wondering how they can make things right. They don't replay the past and think, maybe I went too far. That's not how their mind works. Their concern is not the truth. Their concern is maintaining control. Let me tell you about Harold from Seattle, Washington. He spent 3 years after his divorce waiting for his ex-wife, Sandra, to acknowledge the emotional abuse she had put him through during their marriage. He held on to emails, kept records of incidents, and rehearsed conversations in his mind where he would finally make her understand what she had done to him. But Sandra never acknowledged any of it. In her version of events, Harold was the unstable one, the unreasonable one, the one who had made their marriage impossible. No amount of evidence or explanation could penetrate her constructed reality, because admitting the truth would mean relinquishing the power she still had over Harold's emotional state. Harold's healing began when he finally accepted that closure wasn't something Sandra could give him. It was something he had to give himself. He stopped waiting for her validation and started focusing on his own recovery and growth. This is perhaps the hardest lesson of all. Your healing is not dependent on them. You don't need their permission to move on. You don't need their acknowledgement to validate your experience. You don't need their apology to close that chapter of your life. The path to real freedom. So where does this leave you? How do you actually break free from the psychological hold a narcissist has on you? First, you must accept reality as it is, not as you wish it were. The person you're dealing with is not going to change. They're not going to suddenly develop empathy. They're not going to wake up one day and realize how they've hurt you. Accepting this isn't giving up hope. It's freeing yourself from false hope. Second, you must reclaim your own narrative. Stop allowing them to define your worth, your reality, or your future. Their version of events, their perception of you, their refusal to acknowledge truth. These things are irrelevant to your actual value as a human being. Third, you must enforce boundaries with unwavering consistency. This might mean limited contact, no contact, or simply refusing to engage in their manipulation tactics. Whatever the situation calls for. The key is follow-through. Fourth, you must rebuild your sense of self independent of their validation. If you've spent years adjusting your self-perception to fit their expectations, it's time to take that power back. Your worth is not something that exists at the mercy of another person's recognition. Finally, you must accept that some relationships cannot be repaired, and that's okay. Not every person in your life is meant to stay there. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is to walk away from someone who consistently diminishes your light. Remember to hit the like button if this video has given you clarity about your situation. And don't forget to share it with someone who might need to hear these truths. The journey from recognition to freedom isn't easy, but it's absolutely worth it. When you stop seeking validation from someone incapable of giving it, when you stop trying to fix someone who doesn't want to be fixed, when you stop participating in psychological games designed to drain you, something remarkable happens. You begin to reclaim yourself. The anxiety lessens. The constant second-guessing of your own perceptions fades. The exhaustion from constantly defending yourself lifts. You remember who you were before you got caught in their web. This isn't about becoming hard or cynical. It's about becoming wise. It's about protecting your peace, your energy, and your emotional well-being. It's about understanding that some people view relationships as opportunities for control rather than connection, and choosing not to be anyone's victim. The most powerful response to a narcissist isn't anger. It isn't even confrontation. It's indifference. When they realize they no longer have the ability to pull you into their chaos, they lose interest. And that is when you finally regain your freedom. Your life is too valuable to spend it trying to extract love, respect, or acknowledgement from someone who is fundamentally incapable of genuine human connection. You deserve relationships that add to your life rather than drain it. You deserve to be seen, appreciated, and valued for who you truly are. The moment you stop needing their permission to be worthy is the moment you become truly free. And that freedom, that peace, that return to yourself is worth every difficult step it takes to get there. If you found value in this message, please subscribe to our YouTube channel and share your thoughts in the comments below. Sometimes the most radical act of self-love is simply walking away from what no longer serves you. You have that power, and you always have.